In the glittering world of European royalty, where every smile is calculated and every gesture carries the weight of centuries, some secrets are too dangerous to speak aloud. Behind the golden gates of Ravencourt Palace, where ancient traditions clash with modern realities, a young prince's whispered confession to his trusted bodyguard would shake the very foundations of the monarchy. What could make the most beloved member of the royal family tremble with fear? What shadow from the past threatens to destroy everything the crown has built? And when the unthinkable happens, when a royal guard, sworn to silence and loyalty, breaks down in tears before the entire court, the world will finally understand that even princes are not immune to the darkness that lurks within palace walls. This is the story of Prince Alexander, a boy who should have known only privilege and protection, but instead discovered that sometimes the greatest threats come from those closest to the throne. This is the story of a secret so powerful it could topple a kingdom, and the moment when silence finally shattered into truth. The revelation begins now. The autumn rain drummed against the tall windows of Ravencourt Palace, each droplet creating patterns that seemed to mirror the anxiety coursing through Prince Alexander's 12-year-old heart. He pressed his face against the cold glass, watching the courtyard below, where servants hurried between buildings with umbrellas and urgent purposes. Everything looked normal from his third-floor window, but Alexander knew that normal was just another word for pretending. Captain Marcus Donovan stood silently by the door, his weathered hands clasped behind his back in the same position he had maintained for the past hour. At 45, Marcus had served the royal family for nearly 2 decades, first as a junior guard, then rising through the ranks until King Edmund personally appointed him as Prince Alexander's primary protector. His salt and pepper beard was always perfectly trimmed, his uniform immaculate, and his loyalty absolute. Yet today, Alexander could see something different in the man's steel-gray eyes, a flicker of concern that Marcus tried to hide behind his professional facade. "Captain Donovan," Alexander said without turning from the window, his young voice carrying a gravity that seemed too heavy for his years. "Do you think people can change who they really are?" Marcus shifted almost imperceptibly, the leather of his boots creaking against the polished marble floor. "That's a complex question, Your Highness. What brings it to mind?" Alexander finally turned around, his dark hair catching the dim light from the ornate chandelier overhead. He had his father's strong jawline and his late mother's compassionate eyes, but there was something haunted in his expression that no child should carry. "I've been thinking about my stepmother, Queen Victoria, and about Thomas." At the mention of Thomas Ashford, Queen Victoria's 19-year-old son from her first marriage, Marcus felt his jaw tighten involuntarily. Thomas had arrived at the palace 3 years ago when Victoria married King Edmund, bringing with him a charm that fooled most of the court, but never quite convinced Marcus. There is something calculated about the young man's smile, something predatory in the way he watched people when he thought no one was looking. "What about Master Thomas?" Marcus asked carefully, though he already suspected where this conversation was heading. Alexander walked to his desk, picking up a small wooden knight from his chess set. He turned it over in his hands, studying its carved features as if they held answers to questions he was afraid to ask. "Last week, when you were called away to meet with the Security Council, Thomas came to my room. He said he wanted to show me something special in the old tower." Marcus felt ice form in his stomach. The old tower had been sealed off for renovations months ago, its winding stairs and empty rooms far from the main palace where anyone might hear or see what transpired. "And did you go with him?" "Yes," Alexander whispered, his voice so quiet that Marcus had to strain to hear it over the rain. "He said it would be our secret. He always says that, our secret, but this time was different." The prince set down the wooden knight with trembling fingers and looked directly at Marcus for the first time since the conversation began. In that moment, Marcus saw not a future king, but a frightened child struggling with something far beyond his understanding. "He showed me photographs," Alexander continued, his words coming faster now, as if speaking them quickly would make them easier to bear. "Old photographs hidden in a wooden box behind one of the loose stones. Pictures of people in the palace from years ago, doing things. He paused, searching for words that his young mind could barely comprehend. Horrible things. Things that people shouldn't do to each other. Marcus felt his professional composure beginning to crack. Throughout his years of service, he had protected the royal family from external threats, terrorists, assassins, political extremists. But Thomas Ashford was an internal threat, one that had been hiding in plain sight, using his position as the Queen's son to gain access and trust. Thomas said the photographs proved that terrible people had always lived in the palace. Alexander went on, his voice growing smaller with each word. He said that it was normal, that it was just how things were in royal families. He said that if I ever told anyone about our visits to the tower, he would show the photographs to everyone and prove that I was just like the people in them. The wooden knight fell from Alexander's nerveless fingers, clattering against the desk before rolling onto the floor. Marcus wanted to rush forward, to embrace the child and promise that everything would be all right, but years of training held him in place. He needed to hear everything, needed to understand the full scope of what had been happening under his watch. How many times did he take you to the tower? Marcus asked, his voice steady despite the rage building inside him. 6 times, Alexander replied immediately, as if he had been counting each visit like a prisoner marking days on a cell wall. The last time was 3 days ago. He said next time will be different. He said next time I would understand why the photographs were important, why I needed to be part of keeping the family secrets. Marcus closed his eyes for a moment, fighting the urge to hunt down Thomas Ashford and deal with him in the swift, permanent way he had learned during his years as a Special Forces operative before joining the Royal Guard. But that would solve nothing and create everything, especially for Alexander, who needed protection now more than vengeance. Your Highness, Marcus said, moving closer to the desk where Alexander stood. I want you to listen to me very carefully. Nothing that Thomas showed you or told you is normal. Nothing that he did was your fault. And nothing that he threatened would ever come true. Alexander looked up at him with eyes that held too much knowledge for a 12-year-old. But what if he tells people that I went with him? What if he says I wanted to see the photographs? Then I will tell them the truth, Marcus replied firmly. That a 19-year-old man manipulated child using lies, fear, and photographs of crimes that happened before you were even born. That he used his position in this family to gain access to you when you were vulnerable and alone. The prince sat down heavily in his desk chair, suddenly, looking exhausted. I've been so scared, Captain. Every time I see him at dinner or in the corridors, my stomach feels sick. When he smiles at me across the table, I know he's thinking about our secrets. And Queen Victoria always looks so happy when she sees us talking together. She thinks Thomas is being kind to me, helping me adjust to having a new family. Marcus knelt down beside Alexander's chair, something he had never done in all his years of service. Protocol dictated that he maintain formal distance, but this moment called for something more than protocol. Alexander, he said, using the prince's name without title for the first time in their relationship. I need you to understand something very important. What Thomas has been doing is called grooming. It's a process that predators use to isolate their victims and make them feel complicit in their own abuse. The photographs were likely evidence of historical crimes that he somehow discovered, and he's using them as tools to normalize inappropriate behavior and maintain control over you. Alexander nodded slowly, though Marcus could see that the clinical explanation provided little comfort. Will you tell my father? This was the question Marcus had been dreading. King Edmund was a good man and a devoted father, but he was also deeply in love with Queen Victoria and desperate to create a harmonious blended family. The king had been through tremendous grief after losing Alexander's mother to cancer 5 years earlier, and his marriage to Victoria had brought him happiness that Marcus hated to threaten. Yes, Marcus said finally, but first I need to gather evidence and speak with some other people. What Thomas has been doing is not just wrong, it's criminal. We need to handle this properly to ensure that justice is served and that you're protected throughout the process. What about Queen Victoria? Alexander asked. She loves Thomas so much. This will destroy her. Marcus stood up, his expression hardening with resolve. Queen Victoria's feelings are not your responsibility, Your Highness. Your safety is my responsibility, and I have failed you by not seeing what was happening sooner. That failure ends now. Alexander picked up the wooden knight from where it had fallen and placed it carefully back on the chessboard. Captain Donovan, there's something else. Thomas said that next week, when the court travels to Millbrook Estate for the autumn hunt, he had special plans for our time together. He said the estate had places even more private than the tower, places where we could really get to know each other. The Millbrook Estate was the royal family's ancestral hunting lodge, located in a remote valley 3 hours from the capital. During the annual autumn hunt, the entire court would relocate there for 10 days of tradition and ceremony. The estate was vast, with hundreds of acres of forest, dozens of outbuildings, and countless places where someone could disappear without being missed. Marcus felt a chill that had nothing to do with the autumn weather. If Thomas was planning something more serious for Millbrook, they were running out of time. When does the court depart for Millbrook? Marcus asked, though he already knew the answer. In 4 days, Alexander replied. Thomas keeps asking me if I'm excited about the trip. He says it will be the most important few days of my life. Marcus walked to the window, looking out at the rain-soaked courtyard while his mind raced through possibilities and protocols. In 4 days, the entire royal family, including Alexander, would be isolated in a remote location where Thomas would have unprecedented access and opportunity. The traditional hunt celebrations would provide perfect cover for someone who wanted to move freely without attracting attention. Your Highness, Marcus said, turning back to face Alexander, I need you to promise me something. Until we leave for Millbrook, you will not be alone with Thomas under any circumstances. If he approaches you, if he tries to get you alone, you will immediately find me or another member of the Royal Guard. Can you do that? What if he gets angry? What if he tells people about our secrets anyway? Let me worry about Thomas, Marcus replied. Your only job is to stay safe. Can you promise me that? Alexander nodded solemnly. I promise. As Marcus prepared to leave the prince's chambers, Alexander called out to him one final time. Captain Donovan, will things ever go back to normal? Marcus paused at the door, his hand on the ornate handle. He could lie, could offer false reassurance about returning to simpler times. But Alexander deserved truth, especially after living with lies for so long. No, Marcus said quietly. Things will never go back to the way they were. But sometimes when we shine light on dark places, we discover that normal was never as safe as we thought it was. What comes next might be different, but it will be honest. And honest, even when it's difficult, is always better than a lie wrapped in false safety. After Marcus left, Alexander sat alone in his room, listening to the rain and thinking about wooden knights and dark towers and the weight of secrets that were too heavy for small shoulders to carry. He thought about his father's laugh and his stepmother's gentle smile and the way Thomas could make everyone believe he was something good while planning something terrible. Outside his window, the palace continued its ancient rhythms. Guards changed shifts, servants prepared dinner, and courtiers gossiped about trivial matters. But inside Alexander's room, in the space between childhood innocence and unwanted knowledge, everything had changed forever. The rain continued falling, washing the courtyard clean while inside the palace. Plans began forming that would shake the very foundations of the monarchy. In 4 days, the royal court would travel to Millbrook Estate, but they would not all return unchanged. The game of kings and princes was about to become something far more dangerous, and the stakes were higher than anyone except a frightened 12-year-old boy and his loyal protector could possibly understand. Captain Marcus Donovan had not slept in 36 hours. His office, tucked away in the security wing of Ravencourt Palace, had become a war room filled with files, photographs, and evidence that painted a picture far more sinister than even his worst suspicions had suggested. The coffee in his cup had grown cold hours ago, but he barely noticed as he studied the documents spread across his desk under the harsh light of his desk lamp. Detective Inspector Sarah Chun sat across from him, her sharp eyes scanning through a thick folder of police reports. At 38, Inspector Chun had built her reputation investigating some of the most complex cases involving crimes against children, and her presence in the palace represented both Marcus's trust in her discretion and the gravity of what they were facing. The photographs that Alexander described, Inspector Chun said, looking up from her reading, based on his description and the location where Thomas claimed to find them, I believe we're dealing with evidence from the Pemberton scandal of 1987. Marcus nodded grimly. The Pemberton scandal had rocked the European aristocracy nearly 40 years earlier when Lord Geoffrey Pemberton, a distant cousin of the royal family, had been exposed as the center of a network that had exploited children from local villages during hunting parties at various estates. The scandal had been quietly buried through legal settlements and media suppression, but clearly some evidence had survived. How would Thomas Ashford have gained access to sealed evidence from a decades-old case? Marcus asked. That's what worries me most, Inspector Chun replied. This was an accidental discovery. Someone with significant resources and connections provided him with those photographs. Someone who wanted him to have leverage over the royal family. Marcus felt the familiar weight of pieces falling into place in a pattern he didn't want to acknowledge. You think this goes beyond Thomas acting alone? I think Thomas is a pawn, Inspector Chun said bluntly. The grooming behavior you've described, the systematic approach to isolating and manipulating Alexander, the timing of his integration into the royal family. This has the hallmarks of a coordinated operation. Marcus stood up and walked to the window overlooking the palace's inner courtyard. Dawn was breaking over the ancient stones, painting everything in shades of gray that matched his mood. Queen Victoria married King Edmund 3 years ago. Thomas came with her as part of the arrangement. She presented him as her grieving son who needed a fresh start after his father's death. Have you verified the circumstances of Thomas's biological father's death? That's what I've been doing for the past day and a half, Marcus said, turning back to his desk and pulling out another file. According to public records, Victoria's first husband, David Ashford, died in a car accident in Switzerland 6 years ago. But I contacted my sources in Swiss law enforcement. There was never any David Ashford who died in a car accident on the date Victoria provided. In fact, there's no record of Victoria ever being married to anyone named David Ashford. Inspector Chun leaned forward, her expression sharpening. So who is Thomas, really? Marcus opened the file and spread out a collection of documents and photographs. His real name is Thomas Kellerman. His mother is indeed Victoria, but her real name is Victoria Kellerman, and she's never been married to anyone until King Edmund. She's been moving through European high society for the past 15 years, using different identities and targeting wealthy, powerful men. The photographs showed a woman who was clearly Victoria, but with different hairstyles and colors, standing beside various men in expensive clothing at charity galas, yacht parties, and exclusive social events. The names attached to each image were different, but the face was unmistakably that of the current queen of Ravencourt. She's a professional con artist, Inspector Chun said, studying the images. And Thomas is her partner in the operation. But why target the royal family? What's the endgame? Marcus pulled out a map of Ravencourt and the surrounding region, pointing to several marked locations. Ravencourt sits on some of the largest untapped mineral deposits in Europe, rare earth metals worth billions of dollars. For the past decade, there have been ongoing negotiations about mining rights, but King Edmund has consistently refused to allow extraction due to environmental concerns. But if something were to happen to the king, or if his judgment were compromised by scandal, Alexander would inherit, but he's only 12. A regent would need to be appointed until he comes of age. Under current law, that regent would be his stepmother, Queen Victoria. Marcus traced his finger along the mineral deposit locations. With Victoria as regent and Thomas as her advisor, they would have complete control over those mining rights. Inspector Chun was quiet for a long moment, absorbing the implications. So the grooming, the photographs, the psychological manipulation, it's all designed to either compromise Alexander to the point where he's unable to rule effectively, or to create a scandal that removes King Edmund from power. And if Alexander became too damaged or too much of a liability to their plan, Marcus said quietly, accidents can always be arranged, especially in remote locations like hunting lodges. The two of them sat in silence as the full scope of the conspiracy became clear. This was not a simple case of inappropriate behavior by a troubled young man. This was a sophisticated long-term operation designed to topple a monarchy and steal billions of dollars in natural resources. We need to brief King Edmund immediately, Inspector Chen said. He needs to know what he's married into. Marcus shook his head. Not yet. We need more concrete evidence before we make accusations against the Queen. And we need to ensure Alexander's safety first. The Millbrook trip is in 2 days. If we move too early and tip our hand, Thomas might accelerate whatever he has planned for the estate. Then what do you propose? Marcus walked to his safe and retrieved a small device that looked like an ordinary cufflink. Surveillance. I want Thomas under constant observation. I want to know every conversation, every movement, every breath he takes. And I want Alexander protected by a shadow detail that he doesn't even know exists. Inspector Chen examined the device. This is military-grade surveillance equipment. How did you— My background includes more than just palace security, Marcus said simply. Some skills never fade. Over the next hour, they developed a comprehensive plan. Marcus would personally accompany the royal family to Millbrook, maintaining his usual position as Alexander's primary protector. Inspector Chen would coordinate with a small team of undercover agents who would be positioned throughout the estate as temporary staff. Every building, every path, every possible location where Thomas might attempt to isolate Alexander would be monitored. Additionally, Marcus had arranged for Dr. Elizabeth Hartwell, a child psychologist who specialized in trauma recovery, to be on standby. If their worst fears were realized and Thomas attempted to harm Alexander during the Millbrook trip, they needed to be prepared to provide immediate support. There's one more thing, Inspector Chen said as they concluded their planning. The photographs that Thomas showed Alexander. We need to verify their authenticity and determine how they're connected to Victoria's operation. If they are genuine evidence from the Pemberton scandal, then Victoria and Thomas have access to materials that could compromise other members of the nobility. Marcus nodded. Blackmail is probably how they've funded their operation over the years. Victoria hasn't just been marrying wealthy men. She's been gathering leverage over anyone with power and secrets. As if summoned by their conversation, a soft knock came at Marcus's office door. Enter, he called out, quickly covering the most sensitive documents on his desk. Prince Alexander stepped into the room, still wearing his pajamas and looking younger than his 12 years. Captain Donovan? I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about Thomas and what you said yesterday. Marcus exchanged a quick glance with Inspector Chen, who immediately understood the need for discretion. Your Highness, this is Inspector Chen from the Metropolitan Police. She's helping us with security arrangements for the Millbrook trip. Alexander looked between them with the sharp intelligence that had always impressed Marcus. You're investigating Thomas, aren't you? This isn't just about me anymore. Inspector Chen stood up and approached Alexander with a gentle smile. Your Highness, my job is to protect children who have been hurt by adults who abuse their trust. Captain Donovan called me because he wants to make sure you're safe and because he believes other people might be involved in what's been happening to you. Other people like Queen Victoria? Alexander asked, his voice barely above a whisper. The question hung in the air like a sword suspended by a thread. Marcus realized that Alexander had been thinking about the same connections they had been investigating. The boy was putting together pieces of a puzzle that no child should have to solve. We don't know yet, Marcus said carefully, but we're going to find out. And in the meantime, we're going to make sure nothing happens to you. Alexander walked to the window and looked out at the courtyard where servants were beginning their morning routines. Last night, I heard Thomas talking to someone on his phone. I was going to the kitchen to get some water, and I heard his voice coming from the library. He was speaking very quietly, but I could hear some of what he said. Marcus felt his pulse quicken. What did you hear? He said the boy is almost ready, and Millbrook will be perfect. Then he said something about mother and the final phase. He sounded excited, like he was looking forward to something. Inspector Chin pulled out a small recording device. Alexander, would you be willing to repeat exactly what you heard in Thomas's voice if you can remember it? We need to document everything. Alexander nodded and sat down in the chair across from Marcus's desk. For the next 20 minutes, he recounted not just the conversation from the previous night, but dozens of other small details he had noticed over the past 3 years. The way Thomas watched other staff members, particularly young servants. The times he had caught Thomas going through his father's private papers. The strange visitors who sometimes met with Thomas in the old wing of the palace late at night. As Marcus listened, he realized that Alexander had been unknowingly gathering intelligence on Thomas's operation for months. The boy's natural observational skills, heightened by his growing fear, had created a detailed picture of activities that Marcus's security team had completely missed. "Your Highness," Inspector Chin said when Alexander finished his account, "you've been incredibly brave to pay attention to all these details. What you've told us will help us protect not just you, but other people who might be in danger." "Are there other children?" Alexander asked. "Has Thomas hurt other people?" Marcus and Inspector Chun exchanged another glance. They had been investigating that very question, and the preliminary evidence suggested that Thomas's activities at Ravencourt were not his first. There were gaps in his and Victoria's backgrounds that corresponded with unsolved cases involving missing children from wealthy families across Europe. "We're looking into that," Marcus said. "But right now, our focus is on keeping you safe and stopping whatever Thomas has planned for Millbrook." Alexander stood up and walked toward the door, then turned back with a question that chilled both adults to the bone. "Captain Donovan, what if Thomas doesn't plan for me to come back from Millbrook at all?" The question articulated the fear that Marcus had been trying not to acknowledge. If Victoria and Thomas were planning to assume control over Alexander's inheritance, they needed him gone permanently, not just compromised. A hunting accident at a remote estate would provide perfect cover for murder. "Then, we make sure that doesn't happen," Marcus said firmly. "I've spent my entire career protecting this family, and I will not fail you now." After Alexander left to return to his room, Inspector Chun turned to Marcus with a grim expression. "We need to accelerate our timeline. If Thomas is entering what he considers a final phase, we can't wait until Millbrook to move against him." Marcus nodded, already reaching for his secure phone to contact the additional agents he had requested. "I'll have the surveillance equipment installed by tonight. By tomorrow, every word Thomas speaks will be recorded, and every move he makes will be watched. And if he tries to leave the palace before the Millbrook trip, he won't get past the front gate," Marcus replied. "As of right now, Thomas Ashford, or whatever his real name is under house arrest, whether he knows it or not." As the morning sun climbed higher over Ravencourt Palace, the ancient building continued its stately routines while hidden within its walls. Modern technology and old-fashioned detective work combined to protect an innocent child from predators who wore crowns and titles as disguises for their true nature. In less than 48 hours, the royal court would depart from Millbrook Estate, but they would not be traveling alone. Justice would be riding with them, disguised as servants and shadows, ready to ensure that some secrets could no longer hide in darkness. The game was nearing its endgame, and Marcus Donovan intended to make sure that the right side won. The convoy of black vehicles wound through the mountain roads toward Millbrook Estate like a serpent of secrets and shadows. Inside the lead car, King Edmund chatted cheerfully with Queen Victoria about the hunting traditions they would observe over the next week, completely unaware that his wife was calculating how many days remained until she could claim his kingdom. Behind them, Prince Alexander stared out the window at the passing forest, knowing that somewhere among those trees, his childhood innocence would finally die. Captain Marcus Donovan rode in the security vehicle directly behind the royal car, his earpiece crackling with updates from the surveillance team that had arrived at Millbrook 3 hours earlier. Inspector Chin's voice was steady and professional as she reported the positions of the undercover agents now serving as temporary estate staff. But Marcus could hear the tension beneath her calm exterior. Kitchen staff in position, she reported. Groundskeepers have established perimeter surveillance. Maintenance team has installed monitoring equipment in all buildings. The target is currently in Vehicle 3 with the household staff. He's been unusually quiet during the journey. Marcus adjusted his earpiece and spoke quietly into his collar microphone. Any communication intercepts? Negative. He hasn't used his phone since departure. But thermal imaging shows elevated heart rate and body temperature consistent with anticipation or stress. Thomas Ashford sat in the third vehicle, surrounded by palace staff who believed he was simply Queen Victoria's devoted son, excited about his first hunting trip at the ancestral estate. In reality, Thomas was reviewing his plans for what he considered the culmination of 3 years of careful preparation. Tonight, after the traditional arrival feast, he would begin the final phase of Alexander's corruption. Tomorrow night, when the hunting party retired and the estate grew quiet, he would complete the boy's transformation from innocent prince to willing participant in the darkness that Thomas believed defined all royalty. The Millbrook estate sprawled across 15,000 acres of pristine wilderness, its main lodge built from local stone and timber in the style of a medieval fortress. Generations of royalty had hunted these forests, celebrated victories, and buried secrets among the ancient oak trees that surrounded the property. It was a place where tradition weighed heavily on every stone, where the past seemed to reach out from shadows to influence the present. As the convoy pulled through the massive iron gates, Alexander felt his stomach clench with familiar fear. The estate was beautiful in the golden light of late afternoon, but he could see dark windows staring down from the upper floors of the lodge like empty eye sockets. Somewhere in this vast property, Thomas had prepared spaces where they could be completely alone, far from any help or rescue. King Edmund stepped out of the lead car with the enthusiasm of a man returning to his favorite childhood sanctuary. Magnificent as always, he declared, breathing deeply of the mountain air. Alexander, wait until you see the sunrise from the East Tower. It's been a tradition in our family for over 200 years. Queen Victoria emerged gracefully from the vehicle, her designer hunting attire perfectly coordinated with the rustic elegance of the estate. Thomas is so excited to experience all the family traditions, she said, smiling at her husband with practiced warmth. Aren't you, darling? Thomas appeared at her side, as if summoned, his handsome face arranged in an expression of grateful humility. It's an honor to be included in such important family traditions, Your Majesty. I hope to learn everything I can about our heritage during our time here. The word "our" made Marcus's jaw tighten. In his earpiece, Inspector Chen's voice was sharp with disgust. Target is maintaining his facade. All agents be advised. He's treating this like a celebration. Stay alert for any attempt to isolate the prince. As the staff began unloading luggage and preparing the estate for the week-long stay, Alexander found himself standing alone near the edge of the circular driveway. The forest pressed close to the lodge on 3 sides, and he could see hiking trails disappearing into shadows between the trees. Thomas had told him about those trails, describing secluded clearings and abandoned hunting blinds where they would explore the deeper mysteries of royal life. Your Highness, Marcus appeared beside Alexander as silently as a ghost, his presence immediately comforting. I'll be giving you a complete tour of the estate before dinner. I want to make sure you know every exit, every safe room, every place where help can be found if you need it. Alexander nodded, understanding that Marcus was speaking in code. The tour would actually be a security briefing, identifying safe zones and emergency protocols. Will you be staying in the room next to mine, like at the palace? Closer than that, Marcus replied. I'll be in your sitting room. Direct line of sight to your bedroom door at all times. From across the courtyard, Thomas was watching their conversation with interest that made Alexander's skin crawl. The young man's eyes had taken on a predatory intensity that he usually reserved for their private moments together. Alexander could see Thomas calculating, planning, waiting for the right opportunity to approach. Captain, Alexander whispered, he's staring at us. Marcus didn't turn around, but Alexander could see his body tense slightly. I know. Remember what we discussed. You are never alone with him. Not for any reason. Not under any circumstances. If he tries to separate you from the group, you immediately find me or shout for help. Queen Victoria called out from the lodge's main entrance. Alexander, dear, come see your room. Thomas helped me choose the perfect suite for you. It has a lovely view of the forest. Marcus and Alexander exchanged a glance. A room chosen by Thomas, with a view of the forest where isolation would be easy to achieve, sounded like the beginning of a trap rather than a kindness. As they walked toward the lodge, Inspector Chin's voice crackled through Marcus's earpiece. Kitchen staff reports that the target requested detailed information about meal schedules, guard rotations, and which staff members would be on duty during evening hours. He's gathering intelligence for tonight. The interior of Millbrook Lodge was a masterpiece of rustic luxury, with massive stone fireplaces, ancient tapestries, and mounted hunting trophies that seemed to watch visitors with glass eyes that reflected firelight from a hearth. The main hall could accommodate 50 guests for formal dinners, but tonight it would hold only the royal family and a few selected courtiers who had been invited to share in the traditional opening feast. Alexander's suite was located in the east wing of the lodge, up 2 flights of stone stairs, and down a corridor lined with portraits of long-dead monarchs. As Queen Victoria had promised, the room offered a spectacular view of the forest, but Alexander immediately noticed how isolated the location was from the main areas of the lodge. The walls are quite thick here, Thomas said casually as he helped carry Alexander's luggage into the room. You could probably scream at the top of your lungs, and no one would hear you from the main hall. The comment was delivered with Thomas's usual charming smile, but Alexander understood the threat beneath the words. He glanced at Marcus, who was examining the room's security features with professional thoroughness. Interesting observation, Master Thomas, Marcus said without looking up from his inspection of the window locks. I wonder why someone's first thought about a room would be whether screams could be heard from it. Thomas's smile faltered slightly, but he recovered quickly. Oh, you know how boys can be. Always playing games, making noise. I just meant that Alexander wouldn't disturb other guests if he wanted to stay up late telling ghost stories or playing adventure games. Adventure games, Marcus repeated, his tone neutral but his meaning unmistakable. Yes, I'm sure Alexander appreciates your interest in his recreational activities. For a moment, the two men stared at each other across the room. The pretense of civility stretched thin between them. Alexander could feel the tension like electricity in the air, as if lightning were about to strike. Queen Victoria appeared in the doorway, breaking the moment. Thomas, darling, come help me with the seating arrangement for dinner. Alexander needs time to rest before the feast. After Thomas and Victoria left, Marcus immediately began his security sweep of the suite. He checked every window, every door, every possible entry point while Alexander sat on the bed and watched. The room is secure, Marcus announced after completing his inspection, but I don't like how isolated it is. Tonight, you're sleeping in the sitting room with me. I'll take the couch. You can have the pull-out bed. Alexander felt a wave of relief wash over him. What about Queen Victoria? She'll think it's strange. Let me worry about Queen Victoria, Marcus replied. I'm going to tell her that you've been having nightmares since your mother's death anniversary approached, and that you've requested I stay close for comfort. She can hardly object to helping a grieving stepson. As if summoned by their conversation, Inspector Chin's voice came through Marcus's earpiece. We've intercepted communications from outside the estate. There's a vehicle approaching the perimeter that's not on any approved visitor list. License plate traces to a rental company in Switzerland. Marcus felt ice form in his stomach. Unknown visitors arriving unscheduled could only mean one thing: backup for Thomas and Victoria's operation. How many occupants? 2 adults. Thermal imaging suggests both male, approximately 30 to 40 years of age. They're stopping at the service entrance near the kitchen. Can you intercept? Already in motion. Our people and kitchen staff will identify and detain if necessary. Alexander watched Marcus's face change as he received information through his earpiece. What's happening? Complications, Marcus replied grimly. It appears Thomas and Victoria have called in reinforcements. Through the window, Alexander could see the sun setting behind the forest, painting the sky in shades of red that looked like blood against the darkness of the trees. Somewhere in the lodge below, servants were preparing for the traditional feast that would officially begin the hunting season. Somewhere else, Thomas was planning a different kind of hunt entirely. Marcus activated his collar microphone and spoke in code that Alexander had learned to understand over the past few days. All units be advised. Package security is elevated to maximum threat level. Maintain constant surveillance, and be prepared for rapid extraction if necessary. As if on cue, a soft knock came at the door. Alexander, Thomas's voice called through the heavy wood. May I come in? I have something special to show you before dinner. Marcus and Alexander froze, staring at the door as if it might explode. The polite request carried undertones of command, and both of them could hear the predatory patience in Thomas's voice. Alexander's resting before the feast. Marcus called back. Perhaps later. Oh, but this can't wait, Thomas replied, his voice taking on a more insistent edge. It's a family tradition that must be observed before the opening ceremony. Victoria specifically asked me to retrieve him. Marcus looked at Alexander and made a quick decision. If Thomas was escalating his timeline and invoking Queen Victoria's authority, they needed to force the confrontation into the open where it could be witnessed and documented. Very well, Marcus called out. But I'll be accompanying the prince. Security protocols require my presence during all activities. The silence from the other side of the door stretched for several seconds before Thomas responded. Of course, Captain. Family traditions should always be properly supervised. Marcus helped Alexander straighten his clothing and checked that the small recording device sewn into the boy's jacket was functioning properly. Remember everything we discussed. You're not alone anymore. No matter what happens next, you're not alone. As they opened the door to face Thomas, neither Marcus nor Alexander could have anticipated that within the next hour, the carefully constructed facade of royal propriety would shatter completely, and the true nature of the predators hiding within the palace would finally be revealed to the world. The hunting season was about to begin, but Thomas Ashford was about to discover that this time he was not the hunter, he was the prey.